Art tells stories without words. Painters, printmakers, and photographers tell stories, and doll artists do also. Dutch artist Marleen Verhelst prefers to let the viewer, inspired by her work, create his own story. Her doll's heads, hands, and feet are sculpted in porcelain, finished in watercolor, and her bodies are cloth. Props are paper clay or paper mache. She wants you to provide your own narration for looking for adventure. A well-prepared boy with his horse, companion bear, and weapons. Or I Believe I Can Fly, with the underlying theme of believing in yourself. His wings are too small, but still he believes. Most of Marleen's dolls range from 12 to 18 inches in height. Marleen's title for this doll, Once Upon a Time, reminds us that once upon a time there were authors like Hans Christian Andersen and the Brothers Grimm who collected and rewrote traditional folk tales or invented new stories. Over the years, many NIADA members have found inspiration in fairy tales. Gwen Flather's Little Match Girl in cloth is an early example, probably made in the 1960s. This is Helen Kish's version of the Little Match Girl. For more than 3 decades, Helen has created characters from children's literature for her own company and as a designer for other manufacturers. Most children grow up with fairy tales like Grimm's Rapunzel that have passed on through the generations. Rapunzel is Porcelain by Stephanie Blythe. Rapunzel Hair Washing Day was depicted in cloth by Antoinette Seeley. Jane Davies' Rapunzel is a miniature in porcelain. The mother and daughter team Maggie Finch and Marta Finch-Kozlowski created this Rapunzel. Diane Effner designed her porcelain Rapunzel for manufacturer Ashton Drake. Stephanie Blythe's porcelain doll is her interpretation of Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, a queen bee type who rules over the snowflakes. Diane Keeler's 2012 18-inch polymer clay Snow Queen wears a dress and collar with embroidery designed by Diane and created on her embroidery machine. The dress is embellished with Swarovski crystals. Yema Naroditskia created her 2001 The Little Mermaid in air-drying clay. The Andersen story tells of a young mermaid who is willing to give up life in the sea so she can gain a human soul and the love of a prince. Yema chose another Andersen tale, The Swineherd, as a source for the 16-inch doll she calls Temptation. The doll is air-drying clay, and the base is from an antique beaded bag with an antique silver pot as a gift from the prince. A commission for a collector, these porcelain miniatures of Hansel and Gretel are by British doll artist Jane Davies, as is The Witch. Nancy Walters, the gingerbread witch from the same story, was sculpted in porcelain clay in 1992 for the Disney Doll and Teddy Bear Convention. This 15-inch porcelain limited edition by Faith Wick was made about 1980. Although she titled it Wicked Witch, the apples indicate it was based on Snow White's nemesis. Nancy Wiley's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs dates from 1997. Leslie Mullen's Snow White was made in 2012. As all of Leslie's dolls in this series, Snow's head was sculpted in Das stone clay, covered in silk crepe, and the body is silk crepe. Leslie chose soft blue silk taffeta to contrast with her hair and accented with vintage black lace and a black kimono fabric bow. Mirror, Mirror on the Wall is printed at the skirt hemline. The hand-sculpted apple is overlaid in silk velvet. While some fairy tale characters had the problem of sleeping too much, one couldn't sleep at all due to a pea planted under a stack of mattresses by the prince's mother. This porcelain miniature Princess and the Pea is by Stephanie Blythe. Another porcelain miniature Princess and the Pea was done by Dorothy Hoskins in the 1990s. We see that the princess was really of royal blood, since she couldn't even bear to lie down on the mattresses. When making her Cernet and mixed media Princess and the Pea in the mid-1990s, Catherine Walmsley wondered where one might be as an elder if she followed the same path as the princess throughout life. Holding her head in dismay, Cindy Moyer's 12-inch full-body paperclay sculpt has the problem in hand after a sleepless night. Her nightgown is from an antique christening gown, and a variety of quilt fabrics are topped with a silk velvet coverlet. When Oli Loci spreads his magic umbrella lined with pictures over good children as they sleep, they will have beautiful dreams. Ema Naroditskia created the mythic Sandman from an Andersen story. The Frog Prince was traditionally the first story in Grimm collections. Dorothy Hoskins' miniature porcelain princess looks fairly pleased about kissing a frog. Not so much Diane Keeler's 17-inch Skeptical Princess. The polymer princess and frog were created about 2013. Diane designed and created the embroidery pattern on her gown. Nancy Walters' 14-inch seated porcelain clay princess has grown old and would rather be a spinster than kiss a frog. Stephanie Blythe did a miniature version of the Frog Prince in porcelain. This 12-inch piece from 2006 by Charles Badd is one of a planned series of figures who would be attending the fairy tale ball as their favorite characters from stories or rhymes. The Frog Prince is polymer clay, wood, metal, and metallic embroidered silks. Joellen Trilling's dolls from Thumbelina Chooses the Toad have a steel armature and are sculpted in batting with a stocking overlay. She says this piece was a reflection on her first marriage and some odd relationship choices that followed, though not the current one. If you're not born a princess, do what Cinderella did. Marry in. This is Robert Tonner Doll Company's Cinderella in her bridal gown. Yet it's not so easy as it might seem. Poor Cinderella had a lot of housework to deal with first. But Lisa Lichtenfeld's Cinderella in sculpted batting overlaid with nylon looks like she might be having a premonition of how things will turn out. Pat Brooks' Cinderella from 1985 is carved in wood, like most of her dolls. R. John Wright created this felt Cinderella for the doll and teddy bear convention at Disney World. Nancy Wiley did a number of versions of Cinderella, all in her signature painterly style, for her third storybook, illustrated with her dolls and published in 2014. Trained as an illustrator, Nancy had always intended to illustrate books someday, but she ended up coming about it from a different direction, three-dimensionally. Cinderella's wicked stepmother planned to make sure one of her daughters married the prince, again from Nancy's book. Already accustomed to the best finery, as illustrated by Robert Tonner Doll Company's fashionable Euphemia and Hortensia, the stepsisters wanted to look their best for the prince's ball. Annie Wall's polymer clay stepsisters, with the help of their mother, are primping and adorning themselves, getting ready for the big occasion. Which jewels to wear? Maybe all of them. But if you have a fairy godmother, like Nancy Wiley's 32-inch paperclay piece from 2002, prior to the dolls for her books, or Suzanne O'Royan's 1980 Godmother and Her Mouse, the godmother will make sure that Nancy Wiley's pumpkin becomes a coach, her mice become horses, the lizards become footmen, and Cinderella gets a makeover in a ball gown, along with glass slippers. Cinderella will arrive at the ball, wow the prince, and live happily ever after, at least once that little episode with the lost shoe gets cleared up. Joellen Trilling's Cinderella Knitting Kitty, 20 inches high and completed in 2006, includes a winged fairy godmouse and a frog. In a drawer in the base is a tiny 5-inch book of the story that Joellen wrote and illustrated while she was on jury duty breaks. Every Cinderella has her midnight as a smaller piece, the doll itself about 6 inches tall. It has all the elements of the story, but Cinderella rides on a pumpkin truck rather than a magical, elegant carriage. This Cinderella is made in part from Joellen's dad's old socks, the base embellished with plastic hip bones. Nancy Walters' 16-inch paper clay Getting Out of Here depicts a gingerbread man jumping off the old woman's baking sheet to run as fast as you can. About 1990, Carol Nordell created this polymer clay doll from Andersen's story of the emperor who became enthralled by a bejeweled mechanical bird, but whose life is saved by the song of a real nightingale. Susanna Royan earlier created her own version of the emperor sometime in the 80s. The Kriegers piece was done for a collector who has many original Edmond Dulac paintings and drawings and wanted a piece that closely resembled Dulac's version of the Emperor and the Nightingale. The main character stands 13 inches tall. The tree is carved in paper clay, and each leaf is hand-cut and shaped from copper, then painted. The bridge and backdrop are made of wood. This Jack and the Giant from the story Jack and the Beanstalk was done in paper clay in 2002 by Nancy Wiley. Catherine Walmsley likes to give lesser characters their due, so she sculpted the giant's wife who saved Jack from her bloodthirsty husband in Cernet with mixed media in the early 2000s. Beauty and the Beast are by Nancy Wiley, made in 1998 in paper clay and are 39 inches tall. Former NIADA member R. John Wright designs many fairy tale dolls for his company. He has produced several felt versions of Goldilocks and the Three Bears over the years. One of Jody and Richard Krieger's earlier pieces from 1991 features a polymer clay Goldilocks and their first sculpted and furred bears. Papa Bear stood about 9 inches tall. Cindy Moyer wondered how Baby Bear would feel after his porridge was eaten, his chair was broken, and the culprit was sleeping in his bed. Would he be angry, or find it in his heart to forgive her? Forgiving Goldilocks is the title, and Goldilocks is all fabric construction with a soft sculpted head, stiffened and then skinned with fabric. Baby Bear is made of fur, trimmed and shaped. The bed is of twigs with toothpicks for the peg construction. In the 90s, Nancy Walters made a number of dolls she called Fairy Tales Revisited. This 16-inch seated paper clay Goldilocks has found the 3 stuffed bear toys she loved as a child and is reminiscing about the stories she invented when she played with them, like the one where she sneaked into their house, ate their porridge, sat in their chairs. This 15.5-inch felt Goldilocks by Maggie Iacona was introduced in 2015. The fabrics are airbrushed and the decoupage chairs have one-of-a-kind felted upholstery. Leslie Mullins' Goldie, done in 2012, is dressed in earth colors with a beautiful plaid piece of vintage kimono fabric for her blouse. Her collar is antique linen and her skirt is silk. The original bear is mohair with glass eyes, and Just Right is printed on her skirt. Diana Effner's 14-inch porcelain Goldilocks is part of the Fairy Tale Forest collection she designed for commercial production. Little Red Riding Hood is another popular fairy tale for doll makers. This version in felt is by R. John Wright. This 1999 molded felt Red Riding Hood is by Maggie Iacona. Her dolls are fully posable because of an innovative ball jointing system. Over the years, Maggie's costuming has become more sophisticated. Her Red Riding Hood from 2013 wears a hand-felted and embroidered cape. The most common inspiration for Red Riding Hood is the first version by Charles Perrault, in which she wears a hooded cloak. Helen Kish has designed several of Grimm's versions of the tale, titled Little Red Cap. The Grimm heroine wears a red cap or hat instead of a hooded cape. Tamara Pivniak did several characters grown up into young women, and this 17-inch seated doll in polymer clay from 2009, Little Red Cap, is one of them. Heather Mashak's first Red Riding Hood, 11 inches, has a 5-piece porcelain body, painted eyes, and a mohair wig. The flowers on her cotton dress are reflected in the embroidery on her cape. 8-inch Jenny, a doll created by Heather for the larger market, models a traditional German costume for Red Riding Hood by the German company Boneka. a dirndl with lace apron under a hand-embroidered wool felt jacket and cap. She carries goodies for Grandma. Lexi, Jenny's 8-inch porcelain companion from 2009, masquerades as Brave Little Red, complete with a hand-embroidered wool felt cape and red leather Mary Jane shoes. Nancy Wiley's 2012 book was illustrated in a theatrical style, another love of hers apart from the fairy tales she's enjoyed from childhood. Although the dolls and puppets that illustrate the book are larger, she also designed a limited edition 11-inch resin Red Riding Hood and a 13-inch wolf as companion pieces. Stephanie Blythe created a series of 8-inch characters in porcelain, one of which is Into the Woods. She wanted these pieces more playful and less static, so she gave each character an animal and put them on a cart decorated with the beautiful antique ribbons that she can never find a use for. Leslie Mullen says she has always loved story, myth, and legend, and she believes this brings a bit of history and a foundation to her pieces. Leslie's Red, from 2012, wears a silk dupioni dress, which has both a sheen and a nub, and a linen cape lined with vintage kimono fabric, which she always likes to use on her one-of-a-kinds. Her boots are black silk with red dupioni soles. When Leslie works monochromatically, she uses texture and a bit of contrast to give depth to the color palette and add interest. She likes working in monochromatic themes so the viewer can focus on the details. Most of the fairy tales we've grown up with are European in origin, but there are some we may not know as well as others. Mother Hulda, a 16-inch tall paperclay doll by Russian artist Anna Zueva, is from a German fairy tale collected by the Brothers Grimm. Again, we have a stepdaughter doing all the work. After accidentally dropping a spindle into a well, the stepdaughter leapt in after it and ended up in the alternative world of Mother Hulda. After doing a good job there, the girl was sent home covered in gold. A Bear by Anna Zueva is 14 inches tall, done in paperclay and mixed media, and dates from 2011. Inspired by Masha and the Bear, a traditional Russian fairy tale, the story involves Masha, a precocious and mischievous girl, and Bear, a former circus performer. Portraying the fascination when these stories come alive in a child's mind, Karen Otto Burdick's A Long, Long Time Ago in a Far, Far Away Place dates from 2007. The polymer figures are 16 inches and 12 inches tall. The piece honors her hometown in Germany, where she lived right across the street from the house of the Brothers Grimm. The first poems most children encounter are nursery rhymes. Though part of the oral tradition for much longer, they were written down in the mid-18th century. In the United States, they're also referred to as Mother Goose rhymes, Mother Goose being an imaginary author who supposedly wrote the verses. Jane Davies' 6-inch paperclay Mother Goose on a carved wooden goose illustrates the only nursery rhyme that features her. Old Mother Goose, when she wanted to wander, rode on the back of a very fine gander. Nursery rhymes and fairy tale characters were popular subjects in the art doll world in the 1970s and 80s. Suzanne O'Royan did Mother Goose a number of times in the late 70s and early 80s. These were all polymer clay and ranged in size from 12 to 14 inches. Nancy Walters' 12-inch paperclay Wild Goose Chase from the mid-90s sports the appropriate footwear for making a getaway. The doll was partly inspired by Samantha, the irascible goose in Jessamine West's novel, The Friendly Persuasion. Mother Hubbard actually predates Mother Goose herself. Suzanne O'Royan's 12-inch Mother Hubbard is polymer clay and is from about 1978. Not all NIADA artists did literal interpretations of a particular rhyme. Catherine Walmsley was inspired by Mother Goose in general to create this 2004 paperclay mixed media cat and mouse pull toy. Animals play an important role in nursery rhymes, and Catherine enjoys personifying animals. In the early 90s, Robert McKinley did a number of nursery rhyme dolls in paperclay. This one, actually Celluclay, started as a specific character but morphed into the Mouse Lady when Bob got an urge to make some polymer clay mice. Bob's to Market to Buy a Fat Pig is another of his cartoony dolls from the early 90s. She stands about 16 inches high and is sculpted in paper clay. Susanna Arroyo's version was done about 15 years earlier. Catherine Walmsley's 13-inch paper clay and mixed media pig is the first of the This Little Piggy Went to Market pigs from the toe counting rhyme. It was made in 2014. Catherine has created a set of 5 measuring spoons in pewter with the costume pig sculpted in relief, and she plans to make dolls of the remaining 4 pigs from the rhyme. Sheep also appear in nursery rhymes, or sometimes they don't appear, as in Maggie Iacona's 2014 ball-jointed molded felt Little Bo Peep who couldn't find her sheep. Edna Shaw Doll made this porcelain Little Bo Peep, probably in the 80s. The 17-inch porcelain Bo Peep was designed by Helen Kish for Franklin Heirloom Dolls in 1979. Bob McKinley's 16-inch Bo Peep dates from about 1990 and was sculpted in paper clay. She is 17 inches tall. Nancy Walters' 16-inch porcelain clay Bo Peep got glasses, which enabled her to find the missing sheep, or at least one of them. Kate Church's version is depicted as an actual sheep. Mixed media figurative sculpture, Bo Peep Peep, was created in 2009 and stands 15 inches high. She titled the piece Bo Peep Peep because the 2 tiny birds on the staff are named Peep and Peep. About 1978, Susanna Arroyo sculpted Mary Had a Little Lamb. Marie Antoinette was known for her little hamlet with a working farm where she and her attendants dressed as shepherdesses and played at milking cows and tending to the docile farm animals. Thus, Stephanie Blythe created her 8-inch porcelain Marie Had a Little Lamb as part of her old-fashioned pull toy series with an animal. Not so cute and cuddly, spiders feature in Little Miss Muffet. This porcelain miniature was one of 13 nursery rhymes Jane Davies was commissioned to make for the Kentucky Gateway Museum. In 1995, Heather Mashak made the 6.5-inch seated Miss Muffet. She is porcelain on a cloth body with a Tibetan lambskin wig. Heather made the spider of polymer clay, and they sit on a pillowed tuffet. Several years earlier, Nancy Walters paid a revisionist visit to Miss Muffet. A now liberated miss had been teaching school for 40 years by the time the villainous spider paid a second call. She wasn't intimidated. Nancy's revised version ends and sat down beside her. She picked up her spoon and knocked the fool out of it. Also at Charles Batt's 2006 Fairy Tale Ball, we see the Black Widow Muffet. When Charles realized the figure looked a bit older, he decided she was a widow and dressed her in black. Perhaps Mr. Muffet was not her first husband, but maybe number 5, one of a series of marriages to older, rich men who didn't live long after the honeymoon. The doll is 12-inch polymer clay, wood, and wire, dressed in silk, rayon, and metal lace. Her spiderweb parasol is silver thread, and the spider is made of beads. Susanna Arroyo photographed her Miss Muffet sitting beside her Humpty Dumpty in the late 70s. Humpty Dumpty is one of Catherine Walmsley's favorite characters. She was interested to learn that the verse actually refers to real political figures of the time. This 1990s paper clay and mixed media Humpty, one of 4 Catherine has done, is 10 by 12 by 8 inches. Leslie Keeble titled her piece Oscar Wilde as Humpty Dumpty. The egg, face, hands, and feet are sculpted, with a silk overlay on the face. He wears a silk roving wig and a knicker suit in polka dot silk with leather shoes and mitts. The bricks in the wall are covered in Harris tweed, and the base is leather over wood. Deborah Pope's wet felted or needle felted doll is called the Eggman at Home. Peter, according to the rhyme, had some trouble keeping Mrs. Pumpkin Eater at home. Peter's wife, in her pumpkin-shaped hobble skirt, is by Nancy Walters and was made about 2005. The doll is paper clay and stands 16 inches tall. Catherine Walmsley's Paper Clay and Mixed Media 4 and 20 Blackbirds dates from 2010. According to the rhyme, when the pie is open, the birds begin to sing. But Catherine's blackbirds lift up and down when you turn the crank. Catherine finds Mother Goose a rich source of wacky ideas that fit her personality. Pies figure into other nursery rhymes. Jane Davies' Jack Horner with his plum pie is another of her miniature pieces for the Kentucky Gateway Museum. As is Simple Simon met a pie man, accompanied by one of Jane's favorite black Labrador retrievers. Jane's Little Boy Blue is another miniature for the museum. 18-inch A Tisket a Tasket by Cindy Moyer has a cloth face and upper body and paper clay legs covered in lightweight knit. Her face is colored with acrylics, chalks, and pencil, and she is wigged with horsehair. Cindy was inspired by the floral decorator fabric she used for the bloomer-style pants. The baskets are coiled twine with wire handles, and the bird is paper clay. Elizabeth Barter's porcelain Little Tommy Tucker from the 1970s was inspired by Kate Greenaway's Mother Goose illustrations. Jack Sprat, Who Could Eat No Fat, and his wife, Who Could Eat No Lean, are paper clay made by Catherine Walmsley in the late 90s. She collaborated with a miniaturist potter who recorded the rhyme on the 5-inch plate. From the late 70s into the early 80s, Suzanne O'Royan's dolls included Polly Put the Kettle On, the little girl with a curl right in the middle of her forehead, and the lesser-known Gregory Griggs, who had 27 wigs. He wore them up and he wore them down to please the people of London town. Nancy Walters' 20-inch polymer, paper clay, and celluclay Ride-a-Cock horse from the early 90s was inspired by a vintage merry-go-round on Martha's Vineyard that had rings to catch for a free ride. The rings on her fingers are the brass rings the fine lady has caught on the carousel. Bob McKinley chose just one line to illustrate with his 16-inch paper clay doll from 1990. Rings on her fingers and bells on her toes. Another of Jane Davies' miniature nursery rhyme pieces was Hey Diddle Diddle. Jane's piece illustrated the cat and the fiddle and the cow jumping over the moon. Cloth doll artist Shelley Thornton created Bess as a stand-in for the cow. Bess's dress fabric is printed with scenes from the rhyme. The dish and the spoon from the last line of the rhyme are by Catherine Walmsley. The figures are 10 inches high, and from the mid-90s on, Catherine has made this cast resin pair as an unlimited edition. 3 Men in a Tub from about 1990 was Catherine's second piece in Cernit. She found the smallest realistic barrel she could, then sculpted the dolls to scale. At 20 inches tall, they are atypically large for Catherine. Jane Davies, Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod sail their boat across the night sky, fishing. The jointed porcelain boys are 4.5 inches tall. The boat is carved from one piece of wood in the style of a Dutch canal barge. Annie Wall's Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod is a very early piece, and she says one of the easiest and most fun set of dolls she had ever made. A much more recent set of guys sailing was inspired by a very old illustration she found in an antique book. Annie's Wise Men of Gotham is 11 inches high and made in 2011. The 3 wise men of Gotham they went to sea in a bowl, and if the bowl had been stronger, my song had been longer.